This morning we're going to come back to a familiar passage in the Gospel of Luke, but as we do that, let me just recap for us where we are. Last week we began, was the first of our 12 weeks of a vision and values series for us as a church, where after many months discerning, praying through, thinking through together, what is God calling us as a church uniquely to do, uniquely to be about? We began to unveil some of that process that the Shepherding Council, the staff, and myself have been a part of. And so we believe, and you'll continue to hear this on a weekly basis, a daily basis from us, but that we believe our mission, our purpose, our reason for being is this: that we exist as a church. We exist as King's Cross to embrace brokenness and champion wholeness in and through Jesus Christ. We believe that that is a worthwhile mission, because the vision we have, the belief that we have, is that in God and through God, we believe that whole people can change the whole world. And so for us, this is not simply a question of busy work. It's not an issue for us of what are we doing with these 50, 60 years that we have in the life of faith. We're not just running out the clock, but that we believe our calling in the world is to embrace brokenness and champion wholeness, and that matters in a life-altering, eternity-shaping way, because we believe whole people can change the whole world. And that's what God is calling us to do and to be. And so for the next now 11 weeks, we'll continue to walk through that, have that conversation, begin to think through not only what does that mean for us, that sense of mission and vision, why we exist, what we believe to be true about our calling, but then what does that mean for us as a church? And so that's what the next 11 weeks will be about. Today, this morning, and then next week, today we will focus specifically on the first half of that sense of mission. What does it mean to embrace brokenness? Next week we'll look even more deeply at what does it mean to champion wholeness. And then in the weeks to come we'll begin to build off of that. But I want to share just a quick word too. I didn't get to say this last week, and it was and is important for me to say that while we believe this is a new beginning for us as a church, a new adventure, a new chapter in our story, we also recognize that it didn't mean that we were a radically, totally different place Monday morning. We're the same people. We're the same church, right? And so this process, this vision, this journey is in many ways radical and new and exciting, but it's also in many other ways methodical, slow, intentional. And so what I want you to hear me say, particularly if you're new to King's Cross, is this: that there are lots of good things happening here as a church, but that it's my expectation, my anticipation, that in almost every single area in life of the church, there is good, meaningful room to grow. That we have dreams, we have plans, we have ideas of ways that we want to grow, improve, become even more excellent at any number of places in the life of the church. So if you're just visiting with us for the first time or have been here for just a matter of weeks or months, what I want you to hear me say is this is a vision that is going to provide a roadmap for us, not only in the months to come, but the years to come. And so there's a lot of work for us to do. And so we're not a fully formed, fully functioning ministry machine in a way. But man, what opportunity is there for you to be here now, to be a part of that adventure, and to be a part of building something significant in our city, in our region. So if you're sitting there thinking, man, well, when are we going to do this? Or when are they going to get around to that? Or why don't they do this or do that? Well, the short answer is, I don't know. Maybe it's why you're here. Maybe it's for you to do it, or to dream it, or to build it, or be about it in that way. But there's all kinds of freedom, all kinds of opportunity for us as a church to be about this new and exciting work. So I hope you'll pray about it. I hope you'll see God's will and desire and dream for you in it, and that we will get to dream together about it. Because as I told you last week, we ended the service, you may remember, with that great American prophet, John Lennon, right? who said, "A dream we dream alone is just a dream, but a dream we dream together is reality." And so this is the dream to embrace brokenness and champion wholeness that we as a church are going to be dreaming together. If you have a copy of Scripture, let me invite you now. We're going to turn to the Gospel of Luke, the 15th chapter. And if you've been here the last year or so, since I've been here, this story will be familiar to you. We have studied it 2 different times, and as far as I was concerned, I thought we were done with it for a while. But as we went through this vision process, there was one part of the story that kept pulling us back, that kept nagging at us bit by bit, that we've not talked about together, at least since I've been here. And it's the story of the older brother. Not the younger brother, not the prodigal son, but the old, reliable, older brother, the older son. And so this morning I'll read for us the story of Luke 15, 11 through 32. And as we do that, let me invite you to hear this story through the lens, through the context of embracing brokenness and championing wholeness. But pay a particular amount of attention to the dynamic between the father and the younger son, and then the father and the older son. What's the same and what's different? Who ends up missing out more between the 3 of them? And we'll talk together about that. Let me read for us now, starting in verse 11. It says, "To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, 'I want my share of your estate now before you die.' So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his field to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, 'At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.' So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son.' But his father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For the son of mine was dead and is now returned to life. He was lost and now he is found.' So the party began." Now the last time we studied, we stopped right here. But there's a little more to the story. Jesus says, "Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants what was going on. 'Your brother is back,' he was told, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf. We're celebrating because of his safe return.' The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, 'All these years I've slaved for you, and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back, after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf.' His father said to him, 'Look, dear son, You've always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. For us as believers, and often for us as churches, we tend to deal with brokenness, with making space for brokenness, with moving towards brokenness. We tend to deal with brokenness, I think, on a sliding scale. You know what I'm talking about, right? That there's certain kinds of brokenness or sin or hardship and heartache. There's certain kinds of it that somewhere, somehow along the way, we agree we're going to be okay with dealing with, right? That, well, this kind of problem you have, we're comfortable with that. There's room for you to have that problem here. No problem, right? No issue. It's welcome in this place. We won't call it good. A problem's a problem, right? But we're going to be fine dealing with it, helping you process it. But then the scale slides up a little bit, right? Then there's another set or kind of brokenness, right? Of sin, of hurt or heartache that we say, this makes me a little uncomfortable. I'd prefer you not have this problem. But we're going to deal with it in some ways. Maybe quietly, maybe behind the scenes, maybe with euphemism, maybe with allusion to the problem, right? But then the scale slides even more. And then there's a whole other category of brokenness that we would prefer to never think about, talk about, or deal with individually or collectively, right? It's just easier that way, we say. It's just simpler. It's just cleaner. It just is a lot less messy. And so brokenness gets dealt with for us often as believers, for us often as churches along this sliding scale, where there's certain tiers, certain degrees of acceptability. But for us as a church, what we feel called to as King's Cross is to be the sort of folks that we see mirrored in the life of the Father. We want to be the kind of people like that Father there that is so intent, so interested, so focused on finding the brokenness in the world that we are looking on the horizon. Not just looking at the brokenness in front of us, but like the Father, keeping our eyes on the horizon, that when our Son is still a long way off, we see Him. When that brokenness is still a long way off, we see Him, and then what happens? We run to Him. That we embrace brokenness. We don't just tolerate brokenness. We don't just welcome it. We don't just make space for it in the back. We don't just have a quarantine zone for it. But that we are the kind of people like the Father, who are so interested, so concerned, who believe that the Father really is for us God in Jesus Christ, who is so comfortable, so confident with brokenness, that while the Son was still a long way off, He saw Him, ran to Him, embraced Him, and kissed Him, and said, "What once was lost now is found." That is the kind of place, that is the kind of people we are striving to be. The challenge is you and I, most of us, if you've been in the life of faith, if you've been in church very long, that is far, far different from this brokenness on a sliding scale, isn't it? And so the question is, how do we become people capable of that? Not just people who want that, not just people who say, yeah, sure, that sounds good, but people who actually do it. People who actually can embrace brokenness, who can run towards the Son that offended us so deeply, hurt us so painfully, and say, "My Son, welcome home. What once was dead, now is alive." That's a question for us. That's a question for us this morning. How do we become capable of it? And so I think that's where we come back to the older brother. What did you notice? What did you see as we read those last few verses there? Beginning in verse 25, right? There's a few things that stuck out to me. This is a place where, like all the parables of Jesus, Jesus leaves space for us. Space to interpret, space to explore, space to think together about what's going on. And this is what I would suggest to you, and why I think it intersects and is relevant for us this morning. That at the end of the day, both the father and the brother have been hurt, have been wounded by this younger brother, right? In that culture, for a younger son to ask for any inheritance was fairly bold, if not offensive. To do it before the father died, that's offensive still today. And then to go and use that inheritance to squander on the worst possible things, the things that his father would have raised him to never do. Deeply hurtful, deeply offensive. And then for the older brother, who's probably stuck now with twice the work. Thanks, little brother. I'm still here. I'm still showing up. I'm still working, and now you're gone too, right? This is not how this is supposed to be. This is not what it means for us to be family together. And so here are two men deeply hurt, deeply wounded by this younger brother, this younger son, and yet their response to this return is a polar opposite, isn't it? And so what is the difference between the father and the older brother? This is my theory. This is my thinking. The parable doesn't tell us one way or the other, but as I've sat here and thought about it, this is my belief. That the older brother, his inability to embrace his brother's brokenness is due to one simple thing. That the older brother is unable and unwilling to embrace his brother's brokenness because the older brother has not done the hard work of embracing his own. That our capacity to embrace someone else's brokenness is directly related to our capacity to embrace our own brokenness. And that if we do not do the hard work, if we do not do the risky work, if we do not have the courage to come to terms with our own brokenness, we will never live into our full capacity to embrace the brokenness of someone else. Even those that we love, even those that we share life with. And so I like to believe that the father in this story, deeply hurt, deeply offended, where brokenness and hurt has been done to him. Somewhere along the way, somewhere between when the son has left and the son returns, the father's done the work. The father's named it. The father's explored it. The father's prayed over it, given it to God. And that his capacity to welcome his son back is due to his ability to embrace that brokenness done to him. And in much the same way, the younger brother's capacity to come home, to seek forgiveness, to repent, is done with the conviction, with the courage that comes from coming to terms with his own brokenness. That it wasn't until he was literally in the pig pen, where as a Jewish man, the worst place you could possibly be, to be among the most unclean of the unclean, that he says, I've got to go home. I've got to deal with this brokenness in my life. And yet it's the older brother who's done all the right things, who stayed at home, been a good son, showed up to work every day, never asked for his inheritance, been the model son, done everything he should have done. That when the brother comes home, he just can't stomach it. And I think it's because the older brother has never had the experience, never had the opportunity to come into contact with his own brokenness. Because the truth of the matter is, church, we're all broken. I hate to break it to you. We're all messed up. Let's just admit to it and move on, right? We're all broken. We're all sinners. We're all not how God longs for us to be. But the hope, the good news of the gospel is that God does not leave us there. That the end of the story is not brokenness, but perhaps the beginning of the story is brokenness. And so we cannot have much of a faith journey, we can't have much of a faith story if we never come to terms with the beginning, which is that we are broken. And not just in the ways, the sanitized kind of brokenness that's acceptable here on the sliding scale of brokenness, but the kind of brokenness that we talk about in passing, we talk about euphemistically, or even the kind of brokenness that we can't bear to admit to anybody that we love, much less to ourselves. That the invitation of the gospel, the invitation, the sadness of the brother, is that his inability to embrace his own brokenness limits his life experience. Take a look at the end of Luke 15. His father's reply to the older brother. In verse 31, he says, his father said to him, "Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me." Right? You've done all the right things. And everything I have is yours. Your reward is certain. But we had to celebrate this day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. Think about that for a minute. What has the older brother missed out on? What is the older brother missing because he's unwilling and unable to come to terms with his own brokenness? His relationship with his father is intact. His relationship, his inheritance in the future is intact. And yet, what the older brother has missed out on is the older brother has cut himself off from the celebration with his younger brother. That because the older brother is unwilling and unable to come to terms with his own brokenness, and therefore is unable to come to terms with his brother's brokenness, he is cutting himself off from the fullness of life. He's cut himself off from the fullness of celebration. He's cut himself off from the fullness of family. All because he is trapped in this mindset of scarcity. This mindset that says we have to act right and be right and do right in order to earn something. That the reward we have, the wholeness we have, is somehow of our own doing. And what Jesus is using this parable to say is to say, look, we're all broken. Whether we act on it, whether we live it out, brokenness is going to lead us to the same place. It's going to lead us to the pig pen. It's going to lead us to the lowest part of life. Whether we act it out like the younger brother or whether we stew in it like the older brother. Brokenness is broken. The difference is the younger brother can come to terms with it. The younger brother can admit it. The younger brother can seek wholeness. The older brother can't. And so the challenge for us, church, is that we have a decision to make. That our capacity to embrace brokenness, the brokenness in our families, the brokenness in our neighborhood, the brokenness in our state and our region, all of it is intimately tied first and foremost to our capacity to come to terms with our own brokenness. The question is, will we have the courage to do it? It's a lot harder than it sounds, isn't it? So much of the world, so much of what's been given to us is structured around not embracing our own brokenness, but of painting over it, of hiding from it, of ignoring it. when Joy and I had been married, our first Christmas, we'd only been married 3 or 4 months. We were home and celebrating with her family. Her father is a pastor, has been in ministry about 30 years now. But before that, he didn't get into the ministry until probably about his mid-30s maybe. And before that, he was a photojournalist. And so I have never been photographed more in my life than since I got married into that family. And so now most of the photos that get taken are of the grandkids. Us adults are far less interesting, apparently, than the grandkids. But occasionally we get a few photos. And so the first Christmas we went, celebrated, had a great time. And the week after, so we got an email from her dad of just saying, hey, I got a few photos of you. Take a look. So he sent us the Dropbox link, right? We started scrolling through these photos. And these were really some of the first photos Joy and I had, right? Our first Christmas together. All this kind of stuff. So we're sitting there kind of laughing. It's fun, looking through the grandkids and all that. We got to our photos. We start swiping through them. And Joy's, oh, this is a good one. We should print this, that. And we had this great close-up of our heads, right? Headshot of the two of us. Started scrolling through it. Oh, that's great. She scrolls on to the next one. I say, wait a minute. Stop. Go back. Swipes back. Said what? It's just us, right? I said, wait a minute. Don't you see what's missing? She sat there a minute looking at the picture of the two of us. And she finally looked at me. She said, no, what are you talking about? It's just us, right? They both have 2 eyes, 2 ears, our noses are there, hair's there. She said, what are you talking about? What do you mean, what's missing? I said, what's missing? I said, my mole is gone. And so now you may or may not know this, but when I was in first grade, I got this mole on my chin, right about here. You can't quite see where it was because of my facial hair, but I had this mole since I was in first grade. I eventually named him Trevor. And so I had this mole, right, since I was in first grade. I'd be the first to tell you, I never liked it, right? It really bothered me. So real quick back, get a little context on this, right? So for me, it's kind of on both sides of our family. We have a lot of people with freckles and moles and that kind of stuff. So Trevor was not my one and only mole, right? So since I was a teenager, I went and would go to the dermatologist once a year. You know, by the way, take care of yourselves, people. Go to the doctor. If nobody else is going to tell you that in your life, I'll tell you. Go to the doctor and take care of yourselves. But so every year I would go to the dermatologist, and every so often, every couple of years, they'd find one, take it off. It was fine, this kind of thing. But I remember when I was a teenager, I went and they had this new dermatologist come to the practice, and so it was the first time I'd seen her, and so we were doing the, yearly check where they measure stuff and look at it and do whatever. And if you've ever had that experience, it's awkward to say the least, right? You're just kind of sitting there, and they're kind of looking at you and rolling you over and stuff, and so you inevitably feel the need to talk. And inevitably, there is nothing yet in my life experience that is not awkward to talk about while that's happening. So we were in this place, right? This new doctor, we were new to each other. I was incredibly awkward. I was 16 or something anyways. And so we had exchanged some pleasantries, and then it was just silence, right? Just the doctor doing her thing, talking to the nurse. And so after the silence, she just kind of moved me around, looked me over, and she says, well, you're not the moliest person I've ever seen before. I said, well, I wasn't worried about that until you told me, right? That I'd never crossed my mind that I had a lot of moles until you told me that, right? And so I've had this love-hate relationship with these moles, with these freckles, right? With these imperfections on my skin since I was in first grade or longer. And so fast forward all the way to that first Christmas that Joy and I shared, and I can guarantee you that my father-in-law, what he did is he processed all the pictures, right? There's technology, there's stuff where he didn't even do it intentionally, he just ran it through a batch filter, and the filter removed it, right? It removed this imperfection for me. But what occurred to me, one, in retrospect, is really funny, and still give her dad a hard time about that, about the first picture he took of us as a married couple. But then it occurred to me how much of life, how much of technology, right, is spent covering up our imperfections. Covering up, removing these little slices of brokenness, these little parts of who we are that we really don't like, that we really wish weren't there. And I never thought about it before. It never really bothered me. The picture was a great picture. But what inevitably I found after that, it became a running joke in the family, is I realized, though, that until I got this eventually removed a couple years ago, just because it was easier, but I realized that that picture wasn't accurate. It wasn't me without that mole on there. And even Joy, even my wife, didn't even notice, right? But I did. I knew that that picture wasn't really me. And then at the end of the day, you don't need me. You don't need the church. You don't need that much help knowing where you're broken. You know where the moles are, don't you? That's where the church, I think, got it wrong over the years. When the church has gone through these seasons, particularly really heavy on the fire and brimstone, look, the reality is I really don't think many people need to be reminded they're going to hell. Most people know that they're living it every day. They need help getting out of it. They need help knowing that it's not the end of the story. They need help. They need help knowing that brokenness can be transformed into wholeness, right? Now, I think at other times we've somehow corrected back and we've been so afraid, we've been so resistant to this kind of hellfire and brimstone that we've just said, well, I'm okay, you're okay. We're all okay, right? Well, the truth of the matter is we know that's not true either. I'm not okay. And it's okay. And you know that you're not okay either. I'm broken. You're broken. But the reality is our pathway, our journey towards wholeness in and through Jesus Christ is intimately tied to our capacity to embrace our own brokenness. That we have a decision to make, church. We can be the kind of place that deals with brokenness on the sliding scale, right? We can do prayer requests. We can say, bless your heart. We can do some good things for good people in the community. Or we can be the kind of place that says, I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to do the hard things. I'm willing to be vulnerable to say, I have a problem. To say my life is not as it should be. To say this part of who I am, who I long to be, is broken. It's been fractured. It's been separated. Will you journey with me, church? Will you journey with me, family? Will you journey with me, my friend, my spouse, my child? Will you journey with me towards the hope of wholeness in and through Jesus Christ? The truth of the matter is the younger brother and the older brother were both broken. It's just that only one of them knew it and the other didn't. And so the question is for us, church, not whether or not we've got any moles. We've all got them. The question is, are we just going to paint over them? Are we just going to Photoshop them out? Are we just going to pretend that they're not there? Or are we going to own it? Are we going to do something about it? Are we going to embrace the brokenness within us? That's the question. That's the opportunity. That's the challenge for us. We believe, and we'll continue to talk about this in the month of October, we believe that brokenness and wholeness exists in multiple dimensions of our life. That when Jesus says, You're to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. That's a vision of existence that is fourfold: emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, physically. That brokenness, that pain, that heartache can come to us across all four of those dimensions. And when we talk about embracing brokenness within us, it is both brokenness that's been done to us and brokenness done by us. It's both. And so for you, perhaps this morning, sitting here saying, I've got some brokenness, I've got some issues I've got to deal with. Maybe for you, they're emotional. Maybe for you, they're intellectual. Maybe for you, they're spiritual. Maybe for you, they're physical. Maybe they're all the above. But the reality is, God is longing to restore us, to make us, to transform us into a new creation, not just spiritually, not just emotionally, not just physically, not just intellectually, but across the fullness of life, an integrated life. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Which we could say another way, and love yourself as your neighbor. Some of you this morning need to hear that word, that you are worthy of love. Some of you this morning need to hear that there's acceptance for you. There's value for you. That perhaps the brokenness done to you, and even the brokenness done by you, is on that paradigm, along that spectrum. And so the challenge for us, church, is to believe that the Father is really there, right? That the only way you and I can truly have the courage to embrace our brokenness is if we believe wholeness is on the other side. Because otherwise, why do it? Why take the risk? Why endure the pain? Why suffer the consequences? But I think Jesus is clear. I think the gospel is clear that the only way to move into wholeness is first by embracing brokenness. Because you can't fix a problem you don't admit you have. You can't treat an illness you don't think exists. So as we get ready this morning, church, to finish our time together, to move into another week, to consider what it means for us to be a collective, a family that is about the work of embracing brokenness. My invitation to you this week is this. Consider and name one part of brokenness in your life. I don't know what that looks like, but you do. Maybe it's physical. Maybe it's a pain you've ignored too long. Maybe it's a doctor's visit you've put off for too long. Maybe it's a mole you need to get checked. We can swap stories, right? Maybe for you it's emotional. Maybe for you it's a need for acceptance that's never yet been fulfilled. Maybe for you it's a fear of rejection that you can't quite figure out where or why it comes from. Maybe for you it's a spiritual need, a spiritual insecurity in God's true love and embrace for you. Brokenness is all around us. It's within us. It's done to us. It's done by us. But man, we don't have to live there. That doesn't have to be the end of the story. That doesn't have to be the summation of our life. Wholeness, embrace, celebration. That's what God longs for. That's the party the Father is waiting to throw. But the truth of the matter is, for both the younger brother and the older brother, the pathway to the party is through brokenness. There's no other way to get there. The younger brother figured it out. The older brother didn't. And so my challenge for you this week, church, is to follow that path, the 3 steps of embracing brokenness. First, have the courage to be honest. Name your brokenness to yourself, to God, and if possible, to one trusted person in your life this week. Be honest. Then 2, be grateful. That even in your brokenness, even in your pain, no matter where it fits on that old sliding scale, from acceptable to uncomfortable to unmentionable, no matter what kind of brokenness you have, be grateful that there is always a path home. There's always a path to embrace. There's always a path to wholeness. So be honest, be grateful, and then celebrate. Celebrate the goodness of God in your life and the goodness of God in others' lives. Brokenness isn't the end. It's wholeness. That's who we hope to be. That's whole people changing the whole world. Here now, we'll finish our time in worship. And let me invite you to use this time well. Don't worry about where you've got to be this afternoon. Don't worry about the pile of work waiting for you at home or the problems you'll face in the office tomorrow. Just be here. Don't miss this moment. We have a choice to make, church. Will we have the courage to embrace our brokenness, to create space for others to do the same? Or are we just going to reflex back to doing brokenness on a sliding scale? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of this. This doesn't do anybody any good. And if we want to have the courage to become a place that's equipped, that's welcoming, that's embracing of other people's brokenness, we have to have all the more courage to first do it ourselves. And that's me too. It's you and me together. Use this time well. Be honest. Be grateful. And don't forget to celebrate. Because the path towards wholeness, the path back home, always goes through brokenness. Let's stand together and sing. This is tough stuff. I don't want to undersell it. And so this is a lot harder. This is a lot more in-depth. This is a lifestyle change for us. And so I don't want you to think that we're going to talk about it for 40 minutes and all will be well. This is hard. And so we'll keep talking about it. We'll keep working at it, you and me together. But man, do I believe if we can do this, if we can become this, we can change the world. It's what the gospel is about. It's what we should be about. If you're having a tough place, a tough time knowing where to begin, let me offer you this. Look for the places you're having a tough time joining the party. Where are the places in your life, where are the people in your life that you're struggling with them? With their own celebration, with their own acceptance, with their own forgiveness. Like the older brother, where are those parties we're having a tough time joining? When we're living in the world of scarcity, That's where we live into the jokes that are biting, the gossip that's toxic. When we believe that if we can push someone down, we can be raised up, that's when we haven't done the work. But it's hard work. It's worthwhile work. And so as you go this week, my prayer for you is courage. That you can name that one piece, that one part of brokenness to yourself. That you can name it to God, and that you can name it to one trusted person. If you don't have that person in your life, you've got me. Come find me. Come talk to me. And we can take that journey together. As you go, brothers and sisters, may you go in courage, hearing these words from the book of Lamentations, chapter 3. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh each morning. I say to myself, the Lord is my inheritance. Therefore, I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who depend on him, to those who search for him. So it is good to wait quietly for salvation from the Lord. Brothers and sisters, go with courage, go with hope, and go with peace. For you are the Lord's, and you are loved, broken and all. Amen.